Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really special. We're going on a deeply introspective journey through Jimmy Perez's profound analysis of Mark 12. Now, if you know this text, you know Jesus is having some of his absolute final conversations in Jerusalem. But what Perez brilliantly points out is that right beneath the surface of every single interaction in this chapter lies one massive central invitation. We're stepping completely away from the whole idea of religious performance and moving toward true internal transformation. Jesus isn't just calling out the religious leaders of his day. He's literally holding up a mirror to the condition of every human heart.
All right, so let's get right to the heart of it. The central thesis of today's analysis is so clear. God is not looking for impressive religion. He is looking for transformed people whose lives are rooted in love. You know, it is just so easy to look devoted on the outside, while quietly clutching onto our own agendas and pride on the inside. So, to unpack this, we're going to use 5 specific mirrors pulled directly from the text. We're going to look into each one to really reflect on the true condition of our own hearts.
All right, let's jump to mirror 1, the illusion of ownership. Perez highlights this incredible parable of the vineyard. Basically, a landowner entrusts his vineyard to these tenants, but when it's time to pay up, they completely refuse. They cling to the land. They even kill the owner's beloved son over it. At its core, this story is all about the super dangerous assumption of ownership. The tenants mistakenly think the owner's land belongs to them. And honestly, if we're being real with ourselves, this is exactly what we do in our own lives. Think about it for a second. It is absolutely fascinating to realize just how much the human ego desperately tries to cling to. We walk through life deeply convinced that all these things belong entirely to us. Our time, our abilities, our relationships, our possessions, our influence, our opportunities. We grip them so tightly. But the reality presented in the text is that every single one of these is a gift. They're entrusted to our care, sure, but absolutely nothing we possess is truly ours forever. So this sets up a huge daily internal battle for all of us. The ego is loud, demanding ownership, and proudly declaring, "This is mine." It's constantly asking, "What can I keep?" But then the spiritual ideal, the voice of the Spirit, kind of taps us on the shoulder and gently reminds us, actually, this has just been entrusted to you for a season. True transformation actually kicks in the very moment we stop trying to hoard our lives and start asking how we can faithfully care for what God has temporarily placed in our hands. It's that massive shift from ownership to faithful stewardship. So the crucial question I want you to ask yourself as you look into this first mirror is this: am I living like an owner, or am I living like a faithful steward? Moving right along to mirror 2, reflecting the image of God. In the text, the religious leaders try to trap Jesus with a really controversial question about paying taxes to Caesar. They absolutely think they've got him cornered. But Jesus? He just calmly asks them to look at a Roman coin. And this brings us to a stunning contrast. He points out that the coin belongs to Caesar simply because it literally has Caesar's image stamped on it. But giving to God? Well, that relies on the fact that you bear his image. Perez points out that Jesus' answer here reaches way, way beyond politics or money. It is a profound revelation about human identity and who we truly belong to at our very core. Because think about it, if God's image is stamped upon every human life, if it's stamped upon you, then every single thought, every decision, every relationship becomes a chance to reflect him. True worship isn't just confined to religious activities or showing up at a church service. It is actually revealed in the exact person we become in the ordinary, everyday, quiet moments of our lives.
Which naturally leads us right to our second question for reflection. Does my life reflect the one whose image I carry? What do your daily actions, your text messages, your private decisions broadcast to the world about exactly whose image is stamped on your heart?
Okay, on to mirror 3, leaving room for mystery. Here we get the Sadducees coming at Jesus with a highly complicated, totally hypothetical question about the resurrection. They are 100% convinced they've created an unsolvable puzzle, but their problem isn't God's power. It's actually their own limited imagination. They're trying to confine God to what makes perfect sense within their strict, logical little boxes. And wow, doesn't this perfectly capture our human temptation? The ego's limit demands absolute certainty. We want to confine God to what makes sense to us, and the second life gets confusing, we just assume God isn't working. But the Spirit's wonder invites us to step back and admit, hey, we don't have every answer. Spiritual maturity is actually becoming entirely comfortable with the fact that God's wisdom extends so far beyond our perspective. Humility creates space for wonder, and transformation usually begins right where our certainty ends. So take a hard look into this third mirror.
Have I placed limits on God simply because I cannot yet understand what He's doing? Do you only trust the process when His plans align perfectly with your own logical spreadsheet?
Let's shift over to Mirror 4 and see how this builds on the very foundation of the spiritual journey itself. A teacher of the law approaches Jesus and asks him to identify the single most important commandment of all. Out of all the complex rules, all the deep doctrines, what actually matters most?
And Jesus answers with this one singular, massive word: love. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. He bypassed all the religious achievement. He bypassed the theological degrees and the public recognition. He took the entire, vastly complex spiritual journey and reduced it down to this absolute bedrock principle. But right on the heels of this profound truth comes a pretty stark warning. Jesus immediately warns the people about the scribes. These were religious experts who loved titles, honor, and the mere appearance of spirituality way more than actual transformation. Peres makes a great point here. The ego can quietly hijack absolutely anything, even our spiritual growth. We can use knowledge as pride, seeking superiority, or just trying to win arguments online. But true knowledge, when it's rooted in love, results in real transformation. It makes us grow in humility, in patience, forgiveness, and compassion. Truth should never inflate the ego. It is strictly meant to transform the heart. This prompts a really vital gut check for our own hearts. Is my relationship with God genuinely making me a more loving person? Am I growing in humility as I grow in understanding? Because if our knowledge lacks love, well, it's honestly just pride wearing a religious disguise.
And now we have arrived at our fifth and final mirror, and this one really brings us to the emotional core of this whole analysis. Jesus is sitting opposite the temple treasury, quietly watching people bring their offerings. The wealthy are walking up, throwing in these large, super impressive amounts of money. And then a poor widow approaches.
She drops in just 2 small coins. 2. To everyone else standing in that crowded courtyard, her gift is entirely insignificant. It's practically nothing. But to Jesus, that number 2 carries massive, extraordinary spiritual weight.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the huge divide between how we see things and how God sees them. The world's measure is always about the size of the gift and the outward appearance. But God's measure, it is entirely about the depth of surrender and wholehearted trust. Think about it. The widow didn't give what was convenient or just what she had left over. She gave everything she had. God is absolutely never impressed by what is easy or visually spectacular. He is profoundly moved by a heart that trusts Him completely. Let the sheer weight of her total surrender challenge you as you look into this final mirror. Am I giving God what is left over, or am I giving Him my absolute first and my best?
So the ultimate takeaway from Jimmy Peres's analysis is this: God is not asking for a carefully curated, perfectly managed version of your life. He is simply asking for your heart. Throughout Mark 12, Jesus encountered people who had it all: knowledge, resources, public admiration. Yet only the widow truly understood what God desired. True restoration only begins to happen when we finally stop clinging to ownership, release our obsessive need for recognition, and choose love over pride.
Which leaves us with this final, overarching question to take with you today. Have I given God my whole heart, or only the parts I'm actually comfortable surrendering? I highly encourage you to go read Mark 12 for yourself to discover even more about this profound invitation to transformation. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.